Spoiler warning, as this is a reread video, I do talk about events in almost all of the A Song of Ice and Fire books, but most particularly in events that happen in A Clash of Kings, A Storm of Swords, and A Feast for Crows, with some of the events I talk about being huge spoilers. Additionally, I address the mystery of Jon's mother, and so if you do not want that spoiled for you, I would skip the first section of my video in the chapters below. Hey nerds, what's up? So I already reread A Game of Thrones. I read this in July, at the end of July of 2023, and so it has been less than a calendar year since I first read this book, and I still decided to reread it. I haven't done that ever, maybe? I think in high school. I think I did that a few times in high school, but it has been decades since I felt the need to do that. I just was so sad when I finished A Dance with Dragons, and I know that there's Fire and Blood, which I am really excited to read, but I kept picking up books and putting them down, and I just couldn't get into anything, so I said, you know what? I'm gonna go reread A Game of Thrones, and it's just what I needed. I ended up rereading this very slowly because I was very cognizant of wanting to catch all the things I missed the first time around, and really, now that I know the end, the end of where we are from the beginning, look at character moments and pay more attention to side characters that I probably didn't pay attention to the first time around. And I just ended up noticing a lot. And so I wanted to talk about some of my favorite things that I noticed today. You'll see that I had lots of feelings, lots of things that I ended up marking. Now don't get too excited. Everything that's blue is stuff I marked for my future Catelyn defense video. And let me get distracted here for a second by that. My Catelyn defense video probably will still be a while in coming. I'm sorry, I know so many of you are interested in that video. It's just that it's a video that's gonna take me a long time to prepare, and full disclosure, my kids are out of school right now, which means my time for YouTube is even less than it normally is. So that's probably a video I'll be working on slowly over the summer, and then maybe it'll come out at the end of summer. So I know that's far away, but maybe I can get it earlier, but yeah, it's gonna be a while. But anyway, then all the red things were just things that I need to talk about. So we're gonna start off talking about Jon's mom briefly. Now, I know I talked about this already in the live I did with both Kyles, so I don't want to repeat what I said there. I did just want to talk about the exact moment when I for sure figured it out. As I had mentioned previously, one of my big motivations for wanting to reread A Game of Thrones right away was because I really wanted to figure out the secret of Jon's mom for myself. And I was circling what I thought it was at the end with Dance. For some reason, some of the things that were said in Dance kind of helped things shift into place for me, but I wasn't sure. And so as I was like, I'm just gonna go read A Game of Thrones. I did not expect it to be on page 35 when I figured it out. Well, not when I figured it out, but when I was sure. So I thought I would read you guys the line that helped me figure it out, which was, "I was with her when she died," Ned reminded the king. "She wanted to come home to rest beside Brandon and father." He could hear her still at times. "Promise me, Ned," she had cried in a room that smelled of blood and roses. "Promise me, Ned." And it was just right then, it was oh, geez, it's page 35 that Lyanna Stark is saying, "Promise me, Ned," please. So yeah, that was the moment when I felt very confident in my prediction. I know there are a couple other thoughts about Jon's parentage. This one is, I know, show confirmed, but some people feel like that doesn't mean it'll necessarily be book confirmed. To me, I feel like this is the one that makes the most sense, because even as early as book 1, I had briefly had the idea that Jon wasn't even Ned's son, but I quickly pushed it away because I thought, well, it's just so stupid. What reason would Ned have to lie about that? It would just be too plot convenience, oh, he has to be afraid, because there would be no reason. Just be it's my brother. So I was at the time thinking it might be Brandon's, because, I didn't know a lot. But the fact that Jon is a Targaryen, makes everything fall into place, because obviously you couldn't say that the Targaryen was still alive. He would have been killed immediately. Okay, I know we talked about that one before, but I want to talk about my next section being foreshadowing, just some of my favorite foreshadowing I noticed in the book. And the one I want to start with is Ned dying, because I feel like it is completely wild that I made it through this book without realizing Ned Stark was going to die. I was laughing so hard at the direwolf with the antler through its throat. It was there it was. They even said it was an omen. In fairness, I just don't think the antler meant anything to me at that point. Like, I wasn't keeping track of those sorts of things. But I just laughed again. That's so early on in the book. And then there's a quote: "For a moment, Eddard Stark was filled with a terrible sense of foreboding. This was his place here in the north. He could feel the eyes of the dead." It's like, okay. And then there was like a million other lines like that. So I just thought it was cool on a reread to see the way that George just like tells you. And in many ways, the narrative is marching you towards that end. But I think it's just like reader expectations that stop you from fully accepting that that is what is going to happen, or something will swoop in. And in that way, like, it even proved to me how much more narratively brilliant a Game of Thrones is, because once again, people want to act like Ned's death is shock factor, and it just isn't. It is more that as readers, we go in with expectations and then he subverts them. But there's just so many times where it's like, okay, yeah, George is telling us like Ned is gonna die. So I just thought that was sad, but also a cool thing to notice on the reread. Okay, one other fun foreshadowing thing I noticed this time around is during the hands tourney, and I think we're in Sansa's perspective, and it's one of the last bouts, and it's Sandor against Jaime, and Jaime ends up losing. And I think Renly, I didn't mark it down, so I'm sorry, this is from memory, but Renly says something like, "Oh man, if only the imp was here, then I would have gained double as much," because the person he was talking to had bet on Jaime Lannister. And what it is a blink and you miss it moment where Renly gives away that Tyrion never bet against Jaime. Whereas like the main thing about Tyrion is he won this, or he lost this betting against Jaime, and that is a lie. And you can catch it before you hear Tyrion saying later to Catelyn, "I never bet against my family." And so this time, just like seeing that, they're like, oh, George put it in. If you were a careful enough reader on the first time around, Renly tells us that the imp bet on Jaime, not against him, before we ever find that out. And it's just another little clue that the story Catelyn has isn't the correct story. I just thought that was a super cool element. And again, on a reread, those are the fun things I love noticing. Those little things George put in to give the readers hints, if only you are able to see them. Oh, and before I move on, just like another thing I noticed. So, remember in Storm of Swords and everyone's like, what do you mean you were surprised that Jorah was the spy? It literally tells you in book 1. And like it does several times in book 1 just tell you that Jorah is the spy. So I don't have any excuse for that. My only thought is that I just forgot, because again, like there's so many characters and so many names the first time you're reading it that I think I knew probably while I was reading book 1 that he was a spy, but then just by the time we got to the reveal, I literally forgot, which doesn't mean it's not embarrassing, but it's just weird because I'm usually not one to forget details like that. Like I've never felt when I'm reading a long series, I have a hard time keeping track of things. So I don't know, but I forgot. Okay, I don't know if this is exactly foreshadowing or whatever, but I did want to talk a little bit about Winterfell. There was a line that really got me on this reread, and it said, "I'll go," Robb said. "No," she told him, "your place is here. There must always be a Stark in Winterfell." And I read that line and I was like, oh my gosh. In Clash of Kings, when Bran and Rickon leave, they are the last Starks to leave Winterfell, and then Winterfell falls. So obviously that might have just been coincidence. It might be a superstition, but I feel like George put so much of that in the books where like, yeah, there's not an answer on whether that was superstition or not, or if it was a magic of the place. But indeed, when the last Starks left Winterfell, it fell. And again, it just made me feel emotional. Like I didn't say that earlier, mostly just reading a Game of Thrones made me feel really emo because I didn't realize how good we had it and how much happier everyone was in hindsight. But I really liked that. And it also made me think like, okay, if we do end up getting A Dream for Spring, is the way Winterfell going to be rebuilt because a Stark came back? Like, will Winterfell remain a ruin until a Stark returns to take that rightful place? And which Stark will it be? the show's ending removes one Stark as a possibility to return to Winterfell. Whether that happens in the books or not, we don't know. So, which Stark would it be? I'm trying not to say that because I don't want to do show spoilers here. So yeah, I was just thinking about that. And if we never get a Dream for Spring, then I can pretend that a Stark went back and that Winterfell got rebuilt, and it'll just be up to what I think, which is really good in its own way. So another thing in a similar vein was I was thinking a lot about the wolves, the direwolves. Obviously, the direwolves steal the show the first time around too, but I was thinking more of the symbolism, I guess, of direwolves this time around, and like how they were found and things like of that nature. And one thing I was thinking about was that I had pointed out, I think it was in my Feast review, that both Sansa and Arya had lost their identity as Starks together, and that we see that in their perspectives, how they are slowly losing their identities. And one thing I noticed this time was Arya and Sansa are the only Starks without their wolves. Arya's wolf obviously being scared away and Sansa's being killed. Robb and his wolf perished together, and they're the only two who have lost their identities. Even Jon, who the world questions his identity kind of as a Stark in a way because he's a Snow or whatever, it still has his identity very firm, and it's only the girls who have lost their direwolves that have lost their identity. And the direwolf, is the symbol of House Stark. And I thought that was a really cool thing. Was that intentional? I don't know. It's something I noticed. And will that mean that Arya would eventually gain back her identity when she is reunited, or if she's reunited? Does that mean that Sansa can never regain her identity? I'd hope that wouldn't be true, but I just think that was a really interesting element I noticed. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on that. I'm sure the fandom has talked about that. And if you guys just want to let me know what the fandom thoughts are on that, I would be very interested. Okay, next I wanted to talk about Robert and Cersei. So I had pointed out in Feast that I thought that Cersei was turning into Robert, like that was the point of many of the scenes. But something I had theorized was that Cersei was pregnant in that scene where she thinks that they've shrunk her clothes, her handmaidens have shrunk her clothes, and really she's just getting fat. And I was like, oh, she's gonna be pregnant. And then I reread A Game of Thrones and realized her dress scene literally beat for beat matches Robert's armor scene. So I don't think she's pregnant anymore. I'm gonna remove that from my list of predictions. I just didn't even realize the scenes were so one-to-one, which makes the scene cooler in Feast, like now that I've seen that, but it just takes that away. But it also made me think of some key differences between their arcs and their personalities. And one thing I really noticed is that Robert listens to Ned when Ned says no. Ned only needed a glance to understand the difficulty. The boys are not at fault, he told the king. You're too fat for your armor, Robert. Robert Baratheon took a long swallow of beer, tossed the empty horn onto his sleeping furs, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and said darkly, Fat? Fat, is it? Is that how you speak to your king? He let go his laughter, sudden as a storm. Ah, damn you, Ned. Why are you always right? Yes, Robert gets really angry. I mean, at one point in the story, he tells Ned, you're not my hand anymore, because he gets so angry that Ned is defying him. But ultimately, Robert always does listen to Ned, and Robert regrets that and wants Ned to come back. The girl, Daenerys, only a child. You were right. That's why the god sent the boar, sent to punish me. The king coughed, bringing up blood. Wrong, it was wrong. Only a girl. Varys, Littlefinger, even my brother. Worthless. No one to tell me no but you, Ned. Only you. Look, there's a lot we can discuss between Robert and Cersei. There's so much that goes into their different characters. We have gender dynamics, family dynamics, personality differences. So I realized that, comparing them, we could do a whole video just comparing them and Cersei becoming into Robert and how she isn't and how people treat them differently. I know there's a lot. But one of the interesting elements I just particularly noticed on this read was that Robert did end up having someone he would listen to when Ned told him no, and Cersei does not. There are a couple people who attempt to tell Cersei no. I think particularly of Kevin, obviously, and then in some degrees in Feast, Jaime is starting to become separated from Cersei and kind of push back against her, but she will never come around to those people telling her no. And I just thought that was a very interesting element between their characters and why they are perhaps perceived differently ultimately. And then honestly, the other quotes I marked are just quotes that made me really sad. And they all have to do with Starks, because I am a Stark girl through and through. And if you haven't figured that out yet, I don't know what to tell you. We had Bran and Robb and Rickon. I told him, Bran said. He says no one ever comes back. He can't be a baby forever. He's a Stark in year 4. Robb sighed. Well, Mother will be home soon, and I'll bring back Father, I promise. Except we know that's not what happened. Rickon and Bran never see them again. And then there's Jon saying, but it made no matter, so long as he lived long enough to take his place by his brother's side and help avenge his father. Something we also know didn't happen. Jon never gets to see Ned again. Jon never gets to see Robb again. So, super great. And then, of course, there's the devastating moment that I forgot, that both Bran and Rickon see their father in their dream in the crypt. And Rickon nodded. You leave him be. He's coming home now like he promised. He's coming home. But like Rickon, like his dead father is coming home. Again, super happy. What a cheery story. And then the last quote I marked isn't sad, at least. Well, that's why I'm going to end on a high note, but it is Stark related, which I love the quote. Littlefinger sighed. I fear I did forget, my lord. Pray forgive me. For a moment, I did not remember that I was talking to a Stark. Like that too. The other thing I noticed a lot on my reread was just that I understood the dynamics of the war a lot better. Obviously, it's pretty straightforward the first time you read through, but once you have kind of like the end again from the beginning, being able to really understand better the family dynamics, the history between the Lannisters and the Starks, and keeping all those names straight now because it doesn't take as much to focus, I just feel like I understood the intricacies more of how the war started and why, and the different elements, particularly of like Stannis and Renly and their dynamic. I think even just seeing their small moments in here helped me see the bigger picture. So I just also really enjoyed that. And I think that will definitely be an element that's going to obviously keep happening as I continue to reread the series. Okay, and that was my thoughts on the reread. I'm sorry they were a little disjointed. It's just, I really loved rereading it. I almost was like, oh, is this my favorite book in the series? Which I know is not going to be what I think once I reread the other ones as well. It hit so good on a reread, even better than the first time. Sure, some of the shock factor was gone. I don't think I'll ever get over like my first reaction to reading Ned dying. But now that I get to understand all the intricacies of the characters and plot, rereading it was so satisfying, and I already know it's a book that I could reread a million times. It's just one of those books that will never get boring for me, and I just love that I found something like that again. So if you've reread the series a lot, tell me some of your favorite things you noticed on a reread. Don't give it all away, because I will be rereading the series again at some point. But, just give me one of your favorites that you noticed. And of course, any thoughts on other stuff that I said. One last thing before I go, you might be seeing my background change a bit in the next bit. I'm trying to work it out still. You know what I mean? Like the lighting, the seating, the situation. So it will probably change a bit until I settle into the groove. But for those who were with me when we did our little shelving, thank you. It was very fun, and I'm really happy with how it turned out so far. Glad to have the shield behind me. It's all where it should be. And of course, Game of Thrones in its rightful spot, in an important spot. So, as always, if you like these kind of videos, please like and subscribe. That is the best way to support me. If you want to see what I'm currently reading, as well as other nerdy rants, you can check me out on Instagram at bookborn.reviews. I'll see you next time. Bye.